Welcome back again, you filthy exiles. So I went trawling over the last couple days, and obviously you haven't seen me on stream because I've been trying to find very different, less meta league starters or potential league starters. Now, the list I've got, are they the best league starters out there? Possibly not. Depends on your preference as a player, depends on what you think of certain skills and builds and what you find fun. But the criteria that I use when I look for league starters is consistency of use of league on league. And in fact, some of these builds have been used league on league. In fact, most of them. Community feedback in the comments of the creators' video sections. So in particular, where there's a lot of overarching positive feedbacks, generally a good sign of a consistent league starter. Creator support. For all of these builds, the creators are providing support throughout for, which is great. That means that you've got some sort of resource to pull from if you get stuck, and or a bit of a guide as you go through into a league start. The other one is consistent early leveling and scaling. While many of these are probably not going to be uber killers, early leveling and scaling and the ability to grow the build initially on a relatively cost-effective means is ideal for a league starter and makes it a lot more accessible to newer players and or even more experienced players. And most of all, the last thing I look at is, are they fun? So is it just going to be the same old mundane mishmash of the same builds league on league? Or are they going to be interesting and a little bit different? And, you know, if they are a slower start, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because you might find that the skill itself as it scales up is quite a lot more fun than the same build that the other 50 people are playing next to you. Anyway, let's get into this video for 5 more possible league starters that you could consider for the 3.24 league. Okay, so the first build of the ranks here is the Frostblade Trickster by Zish. Now, the reason why I've picked this one in particular is Zish has played this build for a number of leagues, even with the nerfs that hit in 3.23, with the impacts that Heat Shiver and the patch notes. He still played this build and proved that this build still slaps hard and can progress all the way through to endgame and is still extremely powerful. And this is a great example of where, despite sometimes we see patch notes, we overcorrect for what we perceive to be really bad changes, but in actuality, you're only losing a partial percentage of the already overarchingly overwhelming power a builder's ascertained over time. In this case, in Zish's guide, he's essentially done a full breakdown. Now, it is referring back to his previous league starter guide from the last league, because there weren't really any changes league on league. So the 2 videos I've linked is his update based on the patch notes for the 3.24 league, where he's basically said there's no real changes to the build, which is great. Now, in the case of the POBs provided by Zish, he's given us literally day 1 crap gear. That's the name of the POB. He's also given us a level 95 Voidstone of week 1 variant of the build, so you know where to go and progress, and then a high budget version of the build as well, which is pushing it up into the higher end of the end game, so that you've got a bit of an idea of how to scale it. Of the defenses in this particular build come from an overarching amount of evasion and also spell suppression, which is extremely strong on the Trickster, and one of the reasons why the Trickster is probably one of the best choices you could make when playing Frostblades. As well as the other advantage, which is the Trickster is a lot faster than a number of other builds out there as well. Anyway, if you're looking for a melee build, you don't know what to play, check out Zish's video, check out his updates as well. And yeah, you should have a pretty okay time for the 3.24 league with the Frost Trickster. Okay, so the next build off the ranks is Kitava's Thirst Corpseblaster by Cardboard Bastards. Now, I found this build extremely fascinating, and while not an uber killer, it's not designed to be an uber killer. It's designed to get you into the game and give you a really interesting interaction for a build. Is it the best league starter out there? Probably not. Is it going to be the fastest? Also probably not. The build comes online at about level 50 in your first run through, and the Kitava's Thirst unique item is about 1 to 5C depending on the league on league. And Cardboard runs through all of these details in his build. Now, the other really cool thing about it is he's run this build in 3.23 and in 3.21. I went back on his channel and had a trawl through, and his comments in his video are pretty much overarchingly positive. For people who want to challenge themselves with something a little bit different, this is the perfect build for you. This is a more complex build to get working and requires a little bit more game knowledge to understand how to play it. So I wouldn't recommend this for beginner players, but I definitely would recommend this to intermediate players who just want to really look for an interaction they haven't seen before. And as I've seen from a lot of people, they can't really figure out what they want to play because we've had so many of the same builds league on league without any new skills realistically being added. We're getting variations of skills, but not new skills. So there's not a lot of new stuff coming out on the market. And this is just one various build that, you know, is really cool. Also to note, obviously, Detonate Dead of Chaining wasn't in the game in 3.21, and so he used Detonate Dead and Volatile Dead in that iteration of the build as well. So yeah, that's build number 2. Make sure you check his channel out, drop him a sub. It's a brilliant build. It's just something very different. I've never seen anything like it before, and probably worth just having a look at his video to see if it's something that might be up your alley. Okay, so the next build that I'm going to feature here is from Connor Converse or One Mana Left's video on his Mjolnir Manabond Archmage mana stacker. Now, this is his league start variation and explanation of how he's going to get his mana stacker up and running. For anyone who hasn't followed Connor's builds yet, he plays one build every league. He is very upfront with the fact that it's a little slower to get this build started than other builds, and he provides trees for that within his videos as well, and full explanations of every in and out of the build in gratuitous levels of detail. But I will make this comment: Manabond is a build that by day 2 of the previous league for 2.32, 12% of all Hierophant players are playing Manabond. So it is a very common build to play on League Start. Whether or not you like it, that's the statistics. Factually, nearly 1/10 of the entire player base that plays Hierophant is playing Manabond on League Start, or roundabouts League Start. Now, some things about this build that I would say is it's definitely not made for newer players, right? So this is definitely going to require a little bit more skill set in the game. If you're a beginner player, avoid this build. It's not something you're going to have fun with unless you're willing to do a lot of research and you really follow Connor's stuff and watch his streams, and he explains pretty much everything within all of his content. It's not something that you want to step into without having played PoE before, and I'll preface that straight away. What I will say though is, if you are someone who's been looking at getting a Manabond build running league on league, and you've just been getting around to it, and it's something that you want to tackle this league, there is probably no better creator than One Mana Left to explain how to play a mana stacker. In particular, he's a deep delver as well. This is where this build is its absolute master level played. Anyway, if you want to build on League Start that's a little more complex, be it a little slower to get started, that's going to take you down into the deep depths of Delve, if that's your proclivity, and as a Delve player myself, I would advocate playing Delve, then this might be a build worth checking out, and definitely have a look at Connor's channel. He's got a lot of good videos about Manabond, and he's also covered off in great depth around the patch note changes as well, and covered off on every angle and answered all questions. Okay, so the next build on here is just a classic build, and it's approachable for newer players. The guide in particular is done by EXILEDCAT, and it's the Coldblade Vortex Occultist. Now, is this build going to be like the super mega OPest, like take down Ubers in 5 seconds build? No. But it's going to take you through the game pretty comfortably. And the guide that he's provided, as well as the POBs, breakdowns, everything, leveling and early leveling guide, it's all extremely consistent and very approachable. And the other thing is he's done 0 to Hero and SSF leveling series from the 3.22 league, which can be applied to this build. And the best thing about this build is there hasn't been any real major changes to Blade Vortex for some time. At one point at its peak, and this is going back many leagues ago, this was like one of the go-to builds, and over time has just sort of dropped off the top of the meta list because there are obviously more powerful builds out there, but I think this guide is extremely good, and it covers off on everything you need to know. It's newer player friendly, and included all the POB leveling trees, gearing, and gem level setups that you could possibly need to get started with Blade Vortex or Cold BV. So if you wanted a bit of a blast from the past and wanted to have a crack at Blade Vortex again, this is probably a guide that's worth checking out and up your alley. Okay, so the final build that I'm going to feature here is actually one from me, and it's one that I started in 3.19, serviced again in 3.21, and have updated ever since, and has had ample numbers of players play it, and is tailored for if you don't want to die in the game. This build will get tanky really early. Now, Shield Crush Jugg is definitely a slower build to level up with, and there's no avoiding that. It does take a little longer to do the campaign on day 1. You need to focus on getting a Seething Fury initially, moving into Emperor's Vigilance, and then scaling up from there. And there is the question of the focus mechanic and whether or not we can now automate that. I don't know the answer to that, and it's something that you'll have to try. However, you can just hit the button to activate focus, and that'll also work, so that's also an option. Now, as far as how far I pushed this build, without Mage Blood, I was able to crack 600 depths in Delve, And also I was using it to drop like 400 Depth Crystal Kings and just consistently farm. Now, with the build that I've provided and I've geared up, it is a full leveling guide. It will progress you through the entire campaign. You will hit some plateau points, so it is a little slower than other builds that you will play, but it will scale up and get extremely tanky really early on. In fact, the other night I was streaming with this build to give it a quick early run, and I think by about Act 3 or 4, I had like nearly 1500 to 2000 HP already, and I was just face tanking stuff. So there's also that. But if you're looking to play melee and you want to play something a little more classic, something relatively tanky, and you're sick of playing Boneshatter every league, I'm not saying this build is better than Boneshatter. Boneshatter is just the S tier level of melee builds. But this build is interesting, and it's tanky, and it ticks all the boxes. The other thing is, with enough investment, you can get this build up to Uber takedowns, though you do need to put a bit into it, but I'll leave that up to you guys to work from there. Now, I do have a number of guides that I put out initially in 3.21, which are still applicable to today with minimal changes and obviously updates to the trees. But this build I've featured for a number of leagues now, and it's just a really good all-rounder build, especially moving into a league where you're going to be forced to take down bosses and stuff like that. While this doesn't do as much upper end initial DPS early on, this can face tank stuff, and that's just solving the problem from a different direction. Okay, so hopefully this list gives you some more ideas. Obviously, the purpose of this video is not to tell you what the best league starters are, but to give you some options to investigate and figure out if these fall into your alley of play. And I'd also say, we've got a little time before league, load up a spare character, give them a shot, give them a test. If they don't fit your playstyle, that's okay, at least you'll know. But I figured, what's the point of putting another list together that every other creator will put exactly the same builds into? Wanted to really vary it up and give people some other avenues to tug on as opposed to the same old, same old. That's how we change metas ultimately, league on league, and it's also how we find new combinations and investigate new league starters for potential forward league starters as well. Anyway, if this video gives you a little bit more help and some more ideas, don't forget to drop me a like, don't forget to drop me a sub, don't forget to follow the Twitch and also the X, and anyway, I'll see you guys on League Start. There's a couple more videos due to come out. There's going to be no more build lists at this stage. I'm going to be focusing on early delve content guides at this point, and they should be out in the next couple days. Anyway, I'll see you guys later. Have a good one.